Hey guys, I have a question for you. How do you spread abundance? This year, Joe and I are spreading even more abundance by giving out insights on money, wealth strategies, and resources in our current newsletter, Creating Abundance in 52 Weeks, that we want to share with you for free. So sign up right now as you're listening to this episode on our website at www.abundantculture.co. That's .co/newsletter. www.abundantculture.co/newsletter. Don't let delay get in the way of your abundant year. Now, back to the episode. Welcome back to Abundant Culture Podcast,
where we dissect the mindsets and tactics of the true beasts of business.
People like Gary Vee, Grant Cardone, and Warren Buffett.
All to create a blueprint to experience life more abundantly. Hey everybody, it's Joe here. Welcome back to the Abundant Culture Podcast. We're so glad to have you back again this week. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that is super important for any organization. And this topic is brain gender. Did you know that your brain's gender can be different from your actual body's gender? For example, you can be a male with a female brain, and you could be a female with a male brain. And today we're interviewing somebody who has done extensive research on these differences between male and female brains, specifically how they relate to organizations, how they relate to companies, and how having a good mix of male and female brains can actually boost the performance of your organization or your company. And the name of the book is called All the Brains in the Business. So get ready to listen to and learn from the author of this book, Kate Lanz.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for coming onto the Abundant Culture Podcast. We are so excited to have you. As you can see, like through our conversation before we got on the podcast, I'm like overly excited about this subject because I read your book, All the Brains in the Business. So yeah, we just cannot wait to, really dive deep into the brain and all the neuroscience and, all that stuff and how it relates to business. But before we begin, we have to ask you, like, what is your backstory? How did you get into business?
Good. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity of talking to you guys. I'm really looking forward to it myself. So business, I got into business initially in the big corporate scene internationally. The bulk of my corporate career was with Diageo, and that is a company that makes Johnny Walker whiskey, Gordon's gin, Guinness beer. So if you're into that sort of thing, that's some pretty nice brands. And I was working with them, setting up businesses for them overseas in emerging markets, which was just so much fun, so exciting. And I loved it. But the bit I found that I loved the most was recruiting people, getting good people, the right people for the jobs, and then kind of figuring out what motivated them at work and what made them tick. And I turned out to be really quite good at that. And so I got very interested in the psychology of people at work. And that's what led me to the work I've been doing for the last 20 years, which is like leadership psychology, leadership coaching. And when I quit the big corporate scene, which was a tough call, it was a tough decision to make, but it was the right one for me personally. I trained in psychology, and I was going to become a clinical psychologist, but I figured out that I liked business too much. So I stayed in the business arena, and coaching and leadership coaching is like the sweet spot for all of my interests, passions, and things that I've turned out, fortunately, to be good at. So that's what got me here.
Awesome. And what I was kind of wondering is, can you kind of walk us through, I guess, the journey from, I guess, figuring out that you wanted to do kind of this leadership coaching thing to understanding that the premise of this book basically saying that in the workplace, male and female type brains are needed, because I feel like that's something where it's like when you hear it, it's like, oh yeah, of course, but it's not something that you think about. And it's something that me and Jasmine, it's been something subconsciously we've battled with a lot, just because she's very female brain, I'm very like male
Ah,
brain, but we're
okay.
business partners, so we clash on some things.
Yeah,
But there's definitely times where it's like, oh man, if I didn't have Jasmine, I would have been screwed this time.
yeah,
So it's like, how did you come across this idea of
yeah.
female and male brains both in the workplace?
Yeah, yeah, great. No, thank you for the question, because that really was the genesis of the book. What happened was, it was in the financial crisis, so back in 2008, and I had some of my lovely clients. I mean, I have such cool clients, and one of them in particular was so stressed. He'd been brought over from another part of Europe to take on a big job in London. He was being paid a lot of money to do it, and but his brain was fried. And I mean, he said to me one day, he said, Kate, do you know what, I have to switch myself off in the morning to survive the day in this place,
Wow.
and I switch myself back on when I get home and see my kids' faces. And I just thought, oh my goodness, that's awful. Poor guy. Thank goodness I don't work there. What can I do to help? I mean, every month when I met him for our coaching session, I was, metaphorically speaking, calming the guy down and sort of talking him off a ledge. But I just thought, that's not it. I've got to have a bigger impact on the organization, because I'm sure they don't want to do that to his brain either. They're paying him a lot of money, and so the return on investment on his brain is dreadful, and that doesn't make sense business wise. It doesn't make sense for him personally. What can I do? So I got really fascinated about, what does it take to create the conditions at work for brains to really perform well, to be and thrive. And as I got into looking at the research, it became very obvious really quickly that if you're really serious about creating brain friendly cultures that can access the best of all the brains, you can't ignore brain sex. You cannot ignore the differences between men's and women's brains, because you have to understand them to be able to get the best out of them. And there are some key differences. And that's how I got into the research. And as I got into the research, it was like, gosh, everybody needs to know this. I mean, moms and dads need to know it, schools, business schools, but where I work is in big business.
Yeah.
So that's where I started. But yeah.
So can you tell us some of the male and female differences in the brain?
Yeah, absolutely. There are about 100 key differences. I reckon from my work that about 30 of those differences are important for people to know in business. And again, that's why I wrote the book. It's like, I want to share this knowledge with people. But I think, so the big ones that there are three things that I think I would call out in this conversation. One is that our neural patterning is different. So the way men and women actually, the way the brain fires is different. And for those of us who can see, I'll just hold up an image about that. So that top brain is a male brain, where you can see the activity going very much front to back inside each hemisphere. And the bottom picture is a female brain, where you can see the activity going very much side to side, so between both hemispheres. So that different kind of patterning creates a very different way of paying attention in the world, and what you notice is different. So that's a big thing. I mean, I found that so illuminating when I came across that research. And the second thing where there is a big difference is in hormone levels. So men's brains and bodies have much higher levels of testosterone than do women's. And testosterone tends to drive more competitive, hierarchical behavior. Women's brains and bodies have a lot more oxytocin, and oxytocin is the bonding hormone, the connecting hormone, and that tends to drive more of a focus on collaborating and connecting. And then the third thing that I would call out now in our conversation is different stress responses. So under stress, men's testosterone levels tend to go up, and under stress, women's testosterone levels tend to go down and their oxytocin levels go up. So that means that the stress response is quite different, can be quite different. And those three things are really worth understanding, because if you don't understand them, they can cause frustration. If you do understand them, they can actually help you get the best out of each other and support the different brains, particularly when you're under stress. So those are kind of the big three that I would call out for just now. But there are others that are there and important to know about, and hence the book.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. And it's like, now that because she read the book, I haven't had a chance to pick it up yet, but she's been sharing with me all the notes that she's been getting from the book.
And I probably didn't do it justice. Like, he's like, I don't even know what she's talking about.
Well, I understood everything, and I think I remember everything that she said except for like the stress part.
Yeah.
And obviously, being a business owner is stressful. Just like being a business owner with your spouse can definitely be stressful. And it's so strange that you say that, because it makes so many different things actually clear, because me and Jasmine actually handle stress in a way totally different way. Like, I'm far left and she's far right the way she handles stress. And I don't think either one of them are right or wrong, but it's just different, because we can be looking at the same situation and have a totally different response to the same situation. And that's been coming up a lot lately. And I never really thought that the reason that might be is because of the actual physical differences within the brain. And that's so, and I thought all of this is like, oh, you could just learn to be aggressive. And it's like, maybe not, or not that easily, at least. And that sheds a light on a lot of different things, for sure.
Good. No, and it's always a combination of the actual neurobiological differences and then our personal experiences growing up. So our brains, it's not like all men's brains are like this and all women's are like that. So it's not binary. It exists along a spectrum, and you can figure out the sex of your brain. And it's, your brain is unique, as unique as your fingerprint. And what I'm hoping to help people do is understand what their brain print, what their trust print, I call it, is. Because once you know that, you can then have really deep conversations with each other about what's going on when you're stressed, and what's triggering you into a survive state, and what's triggering you into a thrive state. And you can kind of look out for each other and help each other, and get the best of the differences. Because too much of the time we expect, a lot of the businesses I've worked in, the cultures kind of demand a certain type of behavior. And that's kind of missing a trick, quite a big trick, actually.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
So the next question we want to ask you is about the brain scale, because I took the brain test myself, and I scored an 11. And Joe scored a 6, which was kind of surprising. I honestly thought he was a little lower than that. And then we also gave it to all of our employees at our coffee shop, and we realized that majority of them were like kind of like in the middle, around like that 9, 10, 11 mark. And I was like, wow, that's strange that everybody's kind of falling into like the same area. And as I continued to read the book, it was saying like our the way we hire can be based on like ourselves. And I'm like, well, I guess I have been doing most of the hiring, so of course everybody would be more like me. And we're like, we want to get a little bit more diversity in there. So for the people listening, they probably have no clue what I'm talking about. So can you explain a little bit more about the brain scale, and like how that came about? Like, how did you determine the scale, and like how it was formulated?
For sure, absolutely. No, it's so interesting. And the interesting thing is that the sex of your brain may not be the same as the sex of your body. So that's when it gets, it's really cool. So the scale goes from 1 to 20, and 1 is a very male brain and 20 is a very female brain. And the questions that it asks are based on it's a questionnaire that was developed by a wonderful scientist from Oxford University called Dr. Anne Muir, and heard her speak about her research. So this is why I like this particular questionnaire, because it's based in good science. You know, there are a lot of populist questionnaires out there that try and do the same thing, but this one is one that I trust. And so the questions draw on hardcore underpinning science, and in the way that you answer the questions, it tells you the likely sex of your brain. And as I said, the sex of your brain is made up always of the neurobiological differences that we're born with, that's the nature bit, and then the experiences that we have growing up, and that's the nurture bit. And so I'll give you a little example. So I've got two sons, they're young men now, and they've both done the brain sex questionnaire. One of them, he was off at university, so I kind of filled it in for him. Not that I'm a controlling mother or anything, but anyway, I then rang him up and asked him to answer the questions so we could get his actual scores. But when I scored him, I scored him like 4 out of 20, so very male brain. When he answered the question, he scored 2 out of 20, like a really, really male brain. And he really is, you know, when you look at the brain patterning pictures, he's like he's a geek basically. He's a, you know, and he just kind of locks onto a task and focuses in this kind of really almost like a tunnel vision way, but does things really well and really efficiently. But then there's a bunch of stuff that he just is unaware of. And then my other son has his brain sex score is 12 out of 20, which is the same as me.
Oh, wow.
And so he's very high emotional intelligence. Really, you know, he can read the room. He'll come into the kitchen. He'll see me at the far end of the kitchen. He'll go, "Mummy, I think you need a hug." Like totally tuned in. Anyway, so interestingly, 2 young men with very different brain sex scores, and I have to say, the work that I've been doing and the research, it's really helped me be a better mum to them and understand them and their worlds better, and access them and their worlds better. So your brain sex will be somewhere on that spectrum. Only about 8% of people are either very male or very female. So a lot of people, we have a kind of a mixed brain, somewhere in the middle. But what's important to know is, like, what's your own brain, and what are the triggers that put you into a nice, comfortable thrive state, and what are the triggers that put you into kind of a survive, stressy state, and then you can help each other.
And you mentioned that this number, I think you said that there was kind of natural, almost ingrained aspects of it. And then there's like things that were experience based. So like the nature versus nurture thing.
Yeah.
And one of the questions we had was, could this number, like for whatever reason, change throughout your life depending on like the experiences that you're having?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. Yeah, our brains are highly elastic, so they change depending on our experiences. And so absolutely that number can change. So very often when I'm doing the questionnaire with clients, I get them to answer the questions as if they were a kid. So to go back into their childhood, because that gets to the kind of raw underpinning sex of your brain better. But yeah, your brain sex can absolutely change over time depending on your experiences. So somebody who might be very task focused in a more male brain kind of way, they can really develop their capacity for empathy and emotional intelligence if they choose to do that. Or so somebody, for example, who might have a very male brain but is brought up in a very female environment, you know, by their mom and grandma and lots of sisters or whatever, that will naturally develop the more female side of their brain through experience.
Yeah.
So you get what you focus on.
Yeah. And that's really cool too, because like Jasmine mentioned that she thought I was going to be a lot lower on the scale. And I think the reason she kind of thought that is because like looking back on my upbringing, I was raised around like a lot of women, you know,
right.
And like, I don't know what exactly my score would have been all the way back then.
Yeah.
But there's a noticeable contrast between my personality now and my personality back then. I feel like I probably would have been a little bit more towards the female side when I was younger.
Right.
And I think like a lot of the questions that were asked in the questionnaire were about when you were younger.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of showed up in the test, but also, you know, part of what showed up in the test was, you know, who I am today.
Yeah.
I try to like the whole the emotional intelligence thing is something that I struggled with in the past, and I'm getting better at it, but it's still something that, you know, is very, I guess, male like, but it's very interesting, like taking the test
And like
seeing
I
the
thought I
questions.
would have been higher on the scale, to be honest.
Yeah. But honestly, it's like I could kind of see neutral from you, just because of like just your upbringing. I'm gonna just leave it at that. Your parents. I could definitely see neutral, because they're kind of like neutral. Go
So
ahead.
the next question I had is, in the book you guys talked about like the time that it takes, like the milliseconds it takes for like the neural connections to for your brain to make. So can you change that? Like, can you make the neural connectivity like faster to become like more productive and more aware, or is it kind of just is what it is?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I'm going to answer it in two parts, if I may. And if I can, I show you my brain.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the brain evolved in 3 stages. So this piece here, this piece at the bottom, that is the part of the brain that we inherited from our reptilian ancestors. So that bit is called the brain stem, and it does all the kind of automatic stuff that's just on all the time, keeping your body going. Then about 65 million years ago, mammals evolved. The early mammals came on stream. Now, reptiles just laid eggs, so there was no relationship between the offspring and the parents.
Yeah.
Mammals give birth to live young, so it's thought by evolutionary biologists that this part here in the center of the brain, the limbic brain, the emotional brain, evolved so that we can have a relationship that would help our the survival. And that part of the brain doesn't think, it just feels emotions, and it takes in all the information from the world around us through the 5 senses, analyzes it really quickly inside 85 milliseconds, and tells your body what to do. So if it thinks you're under stress and threat, it will put you into a defense response. And it does that before you can begin to think rationally about what's happening. So the last part of the brain to evolve is this bit here, which is the prefrontal cortex. Now that is a lot younger. That's like 220,000 years old. And that's the bit that does the thinking. That we start thinking about the situation 3 times more slowly than we've already reacted emotionally, because that bit comes on at 250 milliseconds. The emotional brain in the center has already responded inside 85 milliseconds. So we are emotional way before we're rational. And it's really important to know that. So your first response to something is not going to be your thoughtful response to something. And this is where lots of stuff goes wrong at work, is because people will react and they'll say something, or they'll, whatever. And then everybody else gets jumpy. And that's because that's limbic system to limbic system. That's emotional brain to emotional brain. Yeah. And you can't change that. That is how we have evolved. So that bit, that's what we're dealing with. But what you can do is know that that's what's happening. And then you can take action to kind of settle your nervous system down so that your cortex has time to start thinking and come on stream. And then you can start to have a more kind of sensible conversation about what's going on. So that part of the response you can't change. I mean, there is some evidence that Buddhist monks, people who meditate, have got less slower amygdala responses, so slower emotional brain responses. So there is stuff that you can do, but basically that bit you can't change. But what you can change is a really deep understanding of what your response patterns are, so that once you've been triggered into a kind of survive response, you can know why that's happened, calm yourself down, and then engage the rational part of your brain to solve the problem.
And that's very fascinating too, because like there's definitely been times where like I was like somebody triggered something and I got like upset about it, and even before I was like able to respond, like there's that like increased heart rate, start breathing like more heavily and stuff like that. And it's something that it's like it's happened throughout my life and I never really paid attention to it. But now that you say it, I could think back on times it's like, oh, I reacted to this emotionally before I even had a chance to even say anything. And that's a very fascinating realization to know that you'll have an emotional response to something before you can actually have an intellectual response to it.
Yeah.
And that fact about the meditating, I feel like that's a very key point as well, just because it's just the way I am personality wise is very complicated for me to meditate. But I have noticed that it kind of helps. I think it just gives you time to
Yeah.
like, buffer time between reacting, feeling some way and actually reacting to it. And I think that's something that a lot of different workplaces could really benefit from,
Oh, yeah.
because I mean, there's been times where for whatever reason I couldn't react at the time, and then I had to come back to it later, and I was a lot
Yeah.
more intelligent later.
Yeah.
But if I had reacted in the moment, it wasn't going to be pretty for anybody.
Yeah. You're not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some of the benefits of having more female brains in the workplace? Because in the book, I absolutely love the part where you guys put like the statistics, like the, percentage when it's more women board directors. I thought that was so interesting. And I guess like subconsciously, it's like, of course, like, yeah, why wouldn't it be like men and women together like on boards and controlling companies? Because I mean, I can see just with Joe and I that we do such a good job holding each other accountable and really kind of balancing like each other out, especially in those stressful situations. But I guess it's just never like it's just not talked about enough.
Yeah.
No, exactly. No, that was why one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you guys, because you're doing it. You're it. It's like, yay. That's so good. Yeah, absolutely. And there's some really cool research that came out of MIT and in the States and Carnegie Mellon universities that shows that when you've got boards that are 50-50 female male, they're smarter than if you add up the individual IQs of the people on the board. So together, the thinking and the decision making that goes on is better than each of the individuals could do on their own. And so 50-50 female male, you're getting the best of all the brains. You're really leveraging the difference. And I think it's the sweet spot. This is my hypothesis. I haven't read any. I don't think there is any research on this actually. I'd be keen to do it. I think it's the sweet spot in terms of enough kind of the competitive mix versus the more relational focus mix. And I don't want to stereotype at all, but there's just something that happens in that dynamic that allows the best of both the brains to really come to the party and feel welcome. And there's acres and acres of research, lots and lots of research that shows women on boards and women in key decision making levels within businesses, those businesses perform better. And it's all about the partner, like you guys do. It's about partnering. It's not like one type of brain is better than another, but we complement each other.
Yeah.
And that complementarity is not, as I say, it's not like men are like this and women are like that. It's a very subtle thing, and we're all unique and different. And there are, on average, sex differences, and if you know what they are, you can use them.
Yeah, and it definitely, more often than not, it definitely comes together in a very strange way, but it's like, it's hard to explain it, but it just works a lot of time. It really, it's just one of those things that really, really works. And, it's kind of like, and I've noticed, and even in our relationship, like Jasmine is extremely detail oriented. I mean, if you asked her about any aspect of our company, she knows it to basically the T. But when it comes to for example, we're in the private equity space, so we deal with raising capital, buying companies, and different things of that nature. And I think that is a lot more male dominated than it should probably be.
Yeah.
And we meet every now and again, we'll come across a person who's just a very, very male brained person and kind of standoffish. And when it comes to dealing with those people, a lot of times she doesn't like to deal with them because they're super arrogant, honestly. But I'm really good at handling those situations, diffusing them,
Yeah.
making them feel comfortable,
Yeah.
and making sure that they actually stay within their boundaries. And that's
Yeah.
something that I'm really, really good at. But, she's not that good at that part, just
Yeah.
like I'm not necessarily great at kind of like some of the more detailed, nuanced things of the
Yeah.
business. So it comes together in such a way where it's like, it's almost like it's the only way you can have a company that doesn't have any weaknesses in
Absolutely.
a weird way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That's entirely it, because it just gets, it's like a whole complete brain mixed of both of what you both differently bring. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
You.
And I mean, we could even see, well, I mean, not we, because he didn't read the book yet, but I could even see that like in the book, because you came together with, I believe his name is Paul, right?
Paul. Yeah. Yeah.
So like you
Exactly.
guys even like came together, just
Yeah.
as you were writing about, which was
Yeah.
pretty cool too.
Yeah, that we wanted to do that because it's like we're talking about how do you partner intelligently, leveraging the differences, using the differences. And so we just thought it'd be a really cool topic. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's awesome. So how does someone bring together both, the female brains and the male brains for optimum efficiency, either at the workplace or even at home? Because I think what you said, it kind of answered it a little bit, but that kind of 50-50 mix.
Mm.
But like, I guess, how do you go about when you're recruiting somebody? Are you like keeping tabs of like, oh, he's a 6, so we need like a 15 on this side, because if he's not balanced out, it's not going to work out really well. Like, how do you actually do that in practice?
Yeah. So most with my clients, what we do is we just help everybody understand what the brain differences are. So who's in the room. And so the more you know, the better, and the more open you can be about what your own brain sex is, what your own triggers are for survive, and your own triggers for thrive, then you can have deeper conversations. People get to trust each other better, and you can use what the different brains that you've got and deploy them according to the tasks, just like you just described there, Joe, in terms of some of the guys you work with, so that your people are playing to their strengths when that happens. And I do think if you see in your team, when you've tested everybody's brain, that you've got some missing areas, then you can go and recruit with that in mind. And I mean, for me, one of the highlights was a male managing director. This is in a financial environment, who sent an email after the program to a female managing director, and he said, "You know what? I owe you an apology." He said, I used to think you were kind of coming at things in a random, a bit, I didn't get where your point of view was coming from, and I kind of was a bit dismissive about you. And he said, now that I understand the brain sex differences, I can see why you were coming at things from a different way, and actually the value that your different perspective can bring. And he said, so I apologize for not taking you seriously enough, and actually I'm going to reach out to you on purpose because I'm really curious about what you think.
Absolutely.
And that it's like, yeah, hallelujah, that's what we want here.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So is there like as a leader, how do you, like, in practical terms, I guess, get people to really get into like that self-reflection, for them to have experiences like the person that you just mentioned? Like, are there team building exercises or?
Yeah, well, it's obviously horses for courses, but a lot of what I do is, so I think it's important to know, it's like educate. So, either read the book, or I do a lot of workshops, and in the workshops we work on like real business situations that people are in.
Yeah.
And so there's a big piece around education, and then there's another piece around application. So I talk about brain-friendly ways of running meetings, brain-friendly ways of communicating, how to kind of figure out quickly where somebody might be on the brain sex spectrum, so you know how to pitch your communication for that person or those people, and understanding different stress reactions. So if you're in a difficult negotiation and people are getting stressed by it and then reacting in ways that they don't understand each other, I've had several clients where understanding brain sex different has kind of saved a negotiation, and so in a really practical way. So education through reading or workshops, and then just simple application of the models. And that's again why I wrote the book, because I wanted something when people are busy, they're working at speed. So it's like, how do you bring the neuroscience to life in a way that is easy to remember and easy to put into practice when you're working at pace, and you don't have time for going offline and having big deep conversations about stuff. You need frameworks that make it fast to use.
Absolutely.
So there are several models in the book that I've tried and tested with clients to figure out that they work.
Absolutely. Awesome. Another thing I was wondering, you use this term trigger to survive versus thrive.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to expand on that a little bit, because I think you brought it up 2 or 3 times and I don't think we necessarily covered it. But I think it's something that will help kind of tie this all together, because I think that a lot of people have different triggers. Like there's a lot of things that trigger Jasmine that don't bother me at all. And there's things that bother me that I'll explain to her and she's like, why are you bothered by that? And I'm like, I just told you why. But I think everybody kind of has their own response, fight response or whatever. And I wanted you to dig a little deeper into that.
Yeah, good. No, thank you for that. And I'll get my brain back. So what happens is we've basically got 2 dominant modes, and this is massively oversimplifying, of course, but it makes it very clear. One mode is in survive, and that's like when you're driving with the handbrake on and it's really hard and you're trying to get work done, but you can't think straight. You're feeling very stressed, and it's just not happening. So that's your survive mode. And that's basically when the emotional brain is kind of taken over, and it's not letting you think because it's worried that you're under some kind of threat. When we're in thrive, that's like when we're in the zone, you're in flow, you've got endless amounts of energy, it's all cool, and you just get things just get done, and you're thinking well. And that is when the cortex is free to do its thinking, because the emotional brain is kind of stood down, and the neurochemistry that goes with both of those states is really different. And so what you want to do is figure out what triggers you into survive. So one of the things I sometimes ask people to do is think of a relationship, a person who puts you into survive. And when you think about them, it's like, oh God, I don't want to go to that meeting, or I don't want to pick up the phone when it's that person on the phone. And you'll notice physical things like your breathing will go shallower, your heart rate will go up, just at the thought of having a conversation with that person. So that's a survive relationship. Then on the other hand, we all have people who put us into thrive, and it's like, oh yay, great, I've got a meeting with that person, lovely. Or you see their name come up on the phone and you're keen to pick up. And that will change your neurochemistry in a way that will then help you relax and think well. And so really important, and this goes back to your other question about how do you do this at work and how do you get people understanding each other. It's like, it's good to kind of make a note during the course of a few days of the week of what your survive triggers are. So what happened when you went ping and got all anxious or angry or whatever? What was it? Who was there? What was going on? And then what are your thrive triggers, so that you start to micro in and get a really clear view of what causes thrive or survive for you personally. And so let's try and think of some examples. So I've got one client who really responds badly to anyone making a suggestion to him that comes across as bossy. He's a really smart guy. He knows a lot of stuff, and he doesn't like people coming across as kind of smarter than him. And so people can be making perfectly normal suggestions, but if it lands with him as a bit bossy, boom, and then he then he gets a bit shirty and aggressive, and that's good to know, because he's now learned to listen differently to people around him in his team, and just kind of settle himself down so that he can pick up new ideas and not get so triggered by something that lands with him as bossy.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And like I can definitely I can tell when I'm in like that thrive state, just because like my mind feels so clear. Like it feels like I took like a limitless pill or something. from the movie.
Absolutely. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's like, yeah, it's really cool when you like look back and reflect on it, just to know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So we covered so much in this episode, and I'm sure we could continue the conversation forever. But what is the number one takeaway that you'd want someone to walk away from this episode with?
Yeah, that's a cool question. I think that I would say to cause thrive on purpose. So get to know your own brain well enough so that you can cause thrive for yourself on purpose. And then one conversation at a time as you go through your work day, create the emotional response in others that is going to make thrive more likely in their brains. So really think about those different triggers for yourself and other people, and set about causing thrive on purpose. And that's what good leadership is. And so since I've been heavily into the neuroscience, that's one of my definitions of leadership is causing the emotional response in the other person deliberately, not by accident or inadvertently, but understanding brains helps you do that better.
That's really cool. I love that.
Yeah, that's very insightful for sure. So you're on the Abundant Culture podcast, and we feel the need to ask this question to every guest that comes on because we always get very cool and unique answers. And that question is, whether it be in your business, your personal life, or even spiritually, how do you choose to spread abundance on a day-to-day basis?
That's a lovely question as well. I try to generate something new in people's thinking and in any interaction every time I talk to somebody, so that something new happens that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been in that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's excellent because honestly, that's how people learn,
Yeah,
by having
exactly.
new experiences, new conversations, new interactions with people. And I really appreciate you saying that, because I feel like a lot of people kind of get in this echo chamber where they're always hearing the same things over and over again. And I think that kind of stagnates your growth. So anytime you can experience something that's new and different, I feel like it really helps you to grow as an individual and as a person. And I
Yeah.
think it's amazing that you do that
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah, well, and you guys too, which is why I was so happy to be invited onto the show, because I love what you're up to and the way that you share. It's a real act of generosity, and it's so important that we do that now more than ever, actually.
Absolutely.
So it's cool, and it's always a two-way street. It's not like, when you're in those conversations, you're learning as much as you're giving.
Yes.
Always.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
For sure.
So for the person, they think you are awesome. They love all of your work. They love this conversation. Maybe they're interested in having you on their podcast, or listening or coming to a workshop if they, go out to where you're at. How does that person get into contact with either you or your team?
Yeah, lovely. So for me, and I'm really keen to have a big conversation with as many people as I can. So it's a bit of a sort of personal mission, so either on LinkedIn. So it's Kate Lanz, Lanz. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My email is Kate, Kate, at mindbridge.co.uk. So just ping me an email. That's cool too. And I'd love for as many people as possible to read the book, which is on Amazon. It's All the Brains in the Business on Amazon. And I say that not because I set out to sell lots of books. That's not why I wrote it. So it's kind of a bit of a catch-22. Like I say, I just feel I want people to know about this stuff, because I think it leads to happier, more abundant lives, and that's what counts.
Yes.
Absolutely, for sure. So thank you for coming on to the Abundant Culture podcast, Kate. We really appreciate you coming on. I mean, you were a wealth of knowledge, and I feel like you talk about a subject that literally almost no one is talking about, and it's so important. I mean, I told this goes to show you how much of a male brain I have. I was like, does she have any statistics in there that I could use to raise capital from investors? And then you actually did. So you talked about the performance of companies with female and male boards versus just male boards. And you share so much with us, and it's not only something that is really cool to know, but it's extremely practical, not only for entrepreneurs but people in management and maybe people who are entry level, you know, because their ideas are important too.
Absolutely.
So I just thank you, and I encourage you to keep up the great work that you're doing, and keep spreading your message, because it's definitely needed, especially.
Good. No, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you.
So that's all we have for today, folks. I hope you got as much value out of this as we did. Keep in mind, the only way we can improve is through constructive feedback. So remember to rate and review this episode. Also, you are not the only person that needs to know this super valuable information. So be sure to subscribe and share as well. Stay tuned for the next episode, and remember to always spread abundance. Peace.